I grew up on a quiet, shady street in a Chicago suburb. I've always dreamt about recreating my childhood experiences in Minecraft. Welcome to Cedar Circle. And these were looking a little bit too square to me, so I'm actually going to put some barely visible string in here. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that the willow tree, or I should say the vines, only go down so far and then stop. It's going to leave some pockets of air, kind of thin out the willow trees. You see how thick this looks down here, back here? We're going to make it look a little bit more uneven. So not all the vines come all the way down to the bottom. And this one needs a little more filtering. I think it just looks a little bit better this way. Not quite as thick of a draping. And we'll fix some on the inside as well. All it takes is a bit of string, and you create these hollow spaces under the trees. This one looks really nice, I think. It's all uneven. And we'll create a little hollow space in here at different levels. There we go. And then from a distance, they don't look quite so square. And I'm filling out the creek, which starts with another little pipe coming out of the back of houses and then comes along here. Eventually I'm going to work all this out here. This is where we used to play a lot of games like scare ourselves with tales of Old Man River. I think I told that in one of my Let's Talk videos, but I'll recap it again once we get to that section of this. Alright, and I'm doing some terraforming here in what may be the most important part of the field. And when you come down through here and you cross over to the creek and the rock, let's see. That means the rock is right here. Now, I'm going to use cobblestone for the rock, but that hardly does it justice. The rock was a big rock. It was probably, she's probably about 3 to 4 feet high, and it was very round, because you couldn't just jump onto it. You had to like, well, when I was older, I could jump onto it. But when I was younger, you had to like jump on, grab, and pull yourself up onto the top. And we often play, I'm going to leave it like that though. And it should be maybe just a tiny bit wider. It was a very white rock. It was much lighter than the cobblestone. Ooh, do I want to use diorite? It had lots of tiny little round holes in it, pockmarks, like as if the rock was formed with lots of bubbles when it was being created in the earth. I think I am going to use diorite, just for the contrast, if nothing else. And then what I need to do is I need to fill this whole area in here with tall grasses. And then as you made your way from these houses off to school, if you were lucky, some parent would put a rickety board across the creek and you could get across without getting your shoes too muddy. But most of the time the board got knocked into the creek, broke apart, or was gone, and you had to deal with trying to jump the creek and getting your shoes muddy on the way to and from school. If you were like me, you didn't want any part of that board, and you made it your lifelong desire to build your jumping skill enough that you could jump the creek without landing in the mud. Now, if you try jumping the creek, let's say over here, just for example, and you landed on this mud here, you would sometimes sink up to your hips in the mud. That's how like soft the mud was on either side of the creek. But for the most part, this area here was clay, and it was pretty well trodden down by all the kids crossing through here to and from school or after school as they made their way to different play occasions. And this whole section here was high grass. Same thing with this section here, which I'm going to do. Voila. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That didn't work. Why are all those pink flowers? Sugar pops. What I'm doing now is I am just filling in the spots inside of the high grass with double ferns. Basically, we used to call this area the reeds. We said we want to go play in the reeds. What that would mean is we would come out here and we would make mazes in between the reeds. So we would tromp down the reeds in a path, and the reeds on either side of the path would still be there. So we'd like tromp through here and we'd make a maze all through here, and then we'd run through the maze and play all kinds of different games. Now this side here was all high grass. This side here was a lot of these reeds mixed in. And we used to play a game called Indiana Jones, where one person would stand on the rock, close their eyes, and count to 20, and everyone would scatter into the tall grass and into the reeds. And you had to stay on this side of the creek, basically in this area here. And then the person on the rock would jump down and start trudging through the tall grass and try to find somebody. And it was basically hide and seek tag, but we called it Indiana Jones. If you got back to the rock, you were safe. If you got tagged by the person, then you were out. If you got tagged before you got back to the rock. And once everyone got back to the rock, if no one had been tagged, the person who was it on the rock would have to be it again. And you could pretty easily just run and like duck down in the tall grass and hide for long periods at a time. As far as I remember, we never were bothered by snakes or spiders, although there was big spiders out here in the reeds called banana spiders. They were black and yellow, and they made really thick webs. And we were always afraid that they were nasty, poisonous spiders. But as far as I know, none of us ever got bit by any banana spiders either. Still, not something you want to walk into a banana spider web when you're trying to play a game of tag with your friends. Now that looks pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. We've got the tall grass here. Now they actually kept this upper part here mowed, and for whatever reason they didn't mow this bottom part down here. But this is where we used to play in the tall grass. There's the rock. Here's the creek that we used to cross. And then right up here, this was all kind of rocks coming down, washing down with the rain. From right here was a big metal backstop for baseball. There was a baseball field here. And we'll talk about that rest of this part over here in a future episode. Now what I'm doing is I'm going around the lake, and I'm kind of trying to somewhat randomly put in mud and path blocks to kind of simulate sort of mushier mud. And then every once in a while, leave some of it green. And just kind of give it an effect of a shoreline. I've still got to go ahead and put in the reeds and things like that. Oh, you can also probably see the dark green, which I have changed the biome to swampland. So I've done it kind of up and through here. I need to unstraighten this, smooth this out a bit, and I'm working on doing that around the pond as well. All right, so I think that is it for now for the pond. I have taken out all of the red poppies, and I tried to make sure that the other flowers are not too close together, because I honestly don't remember a ton of wildflowers out in the field. A few white ones here and there, but not a ton. Just filling in some high grass wherever I can, in between the trees. Again, it's pretty good. One of the most important features of the pond was the muskrat den, which kind of looked like a pile of sticks, somewhat like a beaver dam, but it was, I'm pretty sure it was a muskrat that lived out on the pond. And in the winter, when the pond was frozen over to ice, we used to slide out there and tromp around on its roof. Can't believe we never, got into any major trouble with wildlife out here. Whereas on occasion, we did actually get into a little bit of trouble with imaginary wildlife or creatures out around the pond. And what exactly do I mean by that? There was a summer where when they meaning the park district, mowed all this grass out here. They had this big giant riding mower, and of course there was like a mulcher on it, but it wouldn't necessarily mulch all of the grass. So it would leave behind large clumps of grass, piles of grass, probably about knee-high to a young kid. And they would just be kind of dotted around. They're actually more frequently than this, but they weren't banded, so they weren't neatly bundled. They were just patches of grass sitting around. And at one point, we decided that to tell ourselves that there could be basically partial zombie bodies under the bales of grass. So if you got too close to one, or if you saw it move, that would mean there's a creature under there, and it could come out and, I guess, chase you. I don't know. But we used to be afraid of walking up and kicking the big piles of loose grass left behind by the lawnmowers. And I realized that, and I'm leaving, by the way, the yellow flowers in because there was lots of dandelions out here in the grasses, but there were very few other wildflowers. So I'm decorating it this way to kind of highlight that the grass had been mowed, but they left behind clumps of grass. And then it occurs to me that pretty much right along this ridge here, there should be a lot thicker collection of reeds, and then actually going out to right about here, this should definitely be high reeds, and coming in here, because when you were out on the pond in the winter, it almost felt like small pond here and a pond back here, kind of the reeds sort of made like a wall to like connect the two ponds together. So I need to think about how I'm going to extend that. And right now I'm going to work on some of the reeds back here. And in particular, these reeds are important to me because I remember one winter it had snowed quite a bit, like quite a bit of snow, and then it froze. It got very cold. So the top layer of snow was like ice, and then below it was like 1 or 2 feet of snow. And where the reeds were, the snow, let's say the snow was about 3 to 4 feet high. Let's say it was 3 feet high. So the top layer was crusty ice, and then down below that was loose powdery snow because it was so cold. So you could actually kind of, if you were careful, you could walk along the top of the snow, but if you put too much weight in your footstep, your leg would break down through the snow, and it was like, you could fall through, and you could even dig out some of the powder and use the top of the snow as, you guessed it, a fort, and go underneath. And so I remember one time Kevin and I came out here, and I think we were going through the field to get to his house. He lived way off this way. But we, particularly coming through here where the snow was up against the reeds, we had a really tough trouble because we kept breaking through the snow, and it was kind of dragging us down. So again, every little patch of, every little cubic meter of this field has stories for me, and hope you're enjoying them. So here I have extended the cattails or the reeds around through that section, and that looks about right. And then you may notice that I've also changed the biome from the dark green swamp to savanna. I'm trying this out because the green is a little too green compared to the rest of the world, and I would leave it just as plain old sugarcane. Problem with that is that the sugarcane is too bright green. It needs to be more of this dull green, which is sort of the cattail color, if you ask me. And that is ultimately the problem. Now, I did go ahead and extend this part and this part. So this looks a little bit better. And I went back and I looked at the current satellite images. So from the shape of this really grassy area, I've got the triangle basically correct. But currently and sadly, the pond is now reduced to a small circle here and a small circle here. But back in my memory, this is pretty close to what the pond was like. And then off here, there's actually a bit of the water flow kind of goes back this way and actually crosses the trail. So a lot of times this part of the trail right here would be flooded. And luckily enough, you can see it's basically at the bottom of this, what do you call this? At the bottom of this hill, this sort of hill. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make this a little more of an incline here. This is about where it used to flood whenever we would have heavy rains or in the spring when the snow melted off. And it wasn't quite enough to make it a creek. Gosh, I'm so sorry about that. But it was enough to flood the path in some of these lower sections. And even in the summer, you might find like low standing water on the trail, on the path itself. Whoops. And there were potholes. That is going to be it for today. Yep, there's the lower part. And then, of course, on this side, you're going to expect to see reeds But we'll deal with that in another episode.